Welcome everyone to the Rose Garden. My name is Kenny Thacker and I'm the founder and chief creative officer of Hunter Roses from Concrete. And it is such a pleasure to have all of you here be in this space with us tonight. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you chose to be here with us. So we really appreciate you sharing this space with us this evening. We have another amazing fire Sunnyside Chat panel for Women's History Month as we are bringing it to a close today. I had the opportunity of being behind the scenes and being able to meet the panelists, and obviously our wonderful moderator, Sister Rosie Monty, is going to be running the show tonight. So I'm just going to absolutely stop talking there because there's so much to cover about this very, very important topic. If you've never been to the Rose Garden, I want you to know that this is a very safe space where we listen, learn, share, and leverage all the information that we will be consuming this evening. So with no further ado, I'm going to pass it to the hostess with the mostest, Sister Rosie Monty. Take it away.
Hey, everybody. Thank y'all so much for joining us for this really important conversation, as Kenny said, on the intersection of womanhood, disability, and inclusivity. A lot of y'all already know me, but I'm Imani. I'm a cultural strategist, really interested in how our stories can impact strategy, how they can impact advertising, but more importantly, how they can impact the world. And as the world continues to really understand the importance of inclusivity, I'm so grateful to be joined by these three women who are looking to create a path forward, not only for those with disability, but a world that's informed by those with disability that'll really innovate for all of us. So I'm just going to say now, I don't plan to speak that much in this conversation. I've had the chance to just chat with these women ahead of this call, and they have so much good to say. So I'll be guiding the conversation, but for the rest of the next hour, you'll mostly be hearing from them. So I want to start off with this quote that I read, and Brittany, Nora, and Masera are familiar with it, but I'll reiterate it for you all. It's a quote that I found when I was researching disability, and I don't recall exactly who it was attributed to, but it stuck with me. And the quote was, "I see the world in a different way than most people." And for me, that's a positive thing. So I'm maybe starting with Brittany, since in this boxy thing, you're right next to me. Can you introduce yourself by telling us a little bit about yourself and how your journey with disability has changed the way you view the world?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Brittany, and I am a teacher at UAM High School in Manhattan. I teach a group of 10th grade students with autism. If you see a member here, he's going to constantly be in the frame. I'm trying to get him to step aside, but he's not listening. But my journey with disability is a new one for me. I became a teacher 3 years ago, and I'm licensed to teach students with disabilities. And I constantly have to continue to learn more about the different disabilities that the students that I teach have, in order to better serve them as their teacher, and as like we're teachers, we're everything else too. We're guidance counselors, we're repair people, like we're everything. So we have to, I like to constantly learn about disabilities and my own journey with my own emotional disability. I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety about a year ago. So that's new for me to learn how to navigate, because it's a space that I've never been in before. So it's all new and a learning experience.
Thank you so much. And I definitely want to dig in a little bit later about your experience with teaching those students with autism, but I'm just going to go in order of like who's next to me. So Nora, you're next in the boxes. Can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how your journey with disability has changed the way you see the world?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Imani. Thank you, Brittany, for your introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Nora, and I am a content manager at KeyPath Education, which is an OPM. It's an online platform management system that basically creates the online programs for colleges and universities, something very accessible for those of us with disabilities, or at least trying to get to be more accessible. so when I was younger, when I was little, actually, I had what I thought influenced my kind of childhood and upbringing. And essentially that was, I had fluid retention in my ears. I didn't talk about this much last night, Miss Sarah, but I actually, like, my parents thought I was deaf for a little bit. So I was a very introverted, shy kid. I thought that influenced a lot of who I was. I had tubes in my ears. I've been fine ever since. I had to go to speech therapy. So Brittany, my mom's a speech pathologist, and she teaches a lot of kids with autism. Didn't mention that yesterday either, but so that kind of made me feel like an imposter. Something, Miss Sarah, we also wanted to bring up last night, when I was diagnosed with ADHD in college. But I also realized that a lot of the tendencies or strategies that I thought I had created was coping mechanisms from undiagnosed ADHD. I was diagnosed with depression before I was diagnosed with ADHD in college. And since then, I've been diagnosed with anxiety, not technically a disability, but how it functions with all of these things. I was diagnosed with endometriosis in 2011. So that definitely exacerbates a lot of, like anxiety, depression, things like that. So it's had a huge impact. Disability and my understanding of it, and now my acceptance of it, has had a huge impact on how I see the world. And I definitely see it in more of a way of everybody's got something going on. And I try to take that into spaces to be kind and thoughtful and empathetic. So
I love that. I love that. And that's, as you know, we're definitely going to try to touch on that later with kind of what we were talking about with othering. But Miss Sarah, last but not least, could you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how your experience with disability has changed the way that you see the world?
Yes, of course. Thank you so much for having me. Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Al-Shiraya, and I am currently an art director. I work as a graphic designer within higher education. And I have been deaf and hard of hearing ever since I was about 6 months old. So I was born hearing, but over that time, I ended up losing that same amount of hearing and then started wearing hearing aids. When I was about 18, I got a cochlear implant on both sides since all my hearing had dropped so drastically that hearing aids could no longer support whatever hearing that I had left. Sign language, American Sign Language, is actually my first language. And, all my life, I've been going to speech therapy. I've been in sign language. I've had interpreters in classrooms, and have been very lots of different kind of backgrounds and different identities. It's always that imposter syndrome and that little conflicting little sense of oh, I am deaf and hard of hearing. But when I tell people that, because I'm a hijabi woman, they're like, oh, I didn't know you were deaf. And I'm like, yeah, now you do. And they're like, oh, I'm so sorry, you poor thing, that is so sad. And so whenever you had that quote, I see the world in a different way, that is something that really resonated with me because, I'm like, no, it's not a bad thing that I have a disability. It's something that allows me to understand people better. I don't automatically be like, oh, you have so-and-so, therefore your experiences are invalidated. And so it's definitely, different identities as different experiences of life. So I appreciate everybody being here as well.
Yeah. This is why I said, everyone, that I don't plan on doing much talking.
No.
Every question that everything that the conversation, the way the conversations go has already been brought up in this brief introduction. So I'm just so excited for y'all to hear the rest of what we have. But on that note, Miss Sarah, because I know that you shared that story with us yesterday, and I was actually thinking about it as I was just kind of thinking about this conversation. We talked a lot about being othered in our pre-discussion and how people tend to other people with disabilities. Can you talk a bit about maybe do you remember the first time that you were othered, or a time that really sat with you other than that time? And also, you mentioned your experience as a Hijabi woman of immigrant background. I'm curious how the different intersections that you fit into play a part in that.
Yeah, for sure. So my older brother is also deaf and hard of hearing. And so I was blessed to have somebody who was able to guide me throughout life on like, oh, like, okay, this is the experiences you're going to be having in the classroom. You are going to be more of an outsider, and you're not going to have that same experience as somebody who is hearing would. You're going to have an interpreter around you. Here's how you handle those situations with having a sign language interpreter. Here's how you handle just being in the classroom. So I think whenever I was younger, the biggest thing I really struggled with was sign language. And the reason why is because if I go out in public, I felt like this sort of like shame whenever my parents assigned to me American Sign Language, or my brother was assigned to me, because I was like, oh, I am, nobody else around me signs. This attracts attention, this draws attention. I don't want attention in any form whatsoever. I just want to appear normal. And so that's the thing, I really had to like get past the point where I'm now on like, oh, it's a privilege to know sign language. And that's a blessing. And if I didn't have it, then how would I be able to communicate when I don't have my hearing aids or my sound processors? And it's definitely like, I always like to joke, I always check all the diversity boxes. I am, my father immigrated over here from Jordan. I'm half American. My mom's from Georgia. She's from the South. She is a white Southern lady. She's super sweet. I'm deaf and hard of hearing. I'm a Muslim. I live in Wichita, Kansas, in the Midwest, where there's a very, very small Muslim community, and a strong lack of diversity as well, and an even smaller deaf community. And so it's definitely that huge, huge imposter syndrome where I'm like, oh, do I even count as a deaf and hard of hearing person? And then just going into those other spaces where I'm like, okay, I have all these things going for me, and also these things are somewhat challenges in their own way.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I think I remember yesterday we also talked about just like that part of like living in Kansas and how it's kind of impacted the way that your experience with your disability has gone. In that same no, and also you didn't share this is your story about your brother was so touching to me. Brittany, I know that your brother also deals with a disability, and he was kind of like an introduction to you for it, and correct me if I'm getting it wrong, but I'm curious, does Masera's story resonate with you? How did his own diagnosis, did it at all guide your journey?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you. So yes, I now can see things the way he sees them, going through that same journey with myself. So in that way that Masara's brother was for her, I feel like I'm that for him, to guide him and show him like coping skills and things that he can do, and just let him know that this is not him. This is not his entire life. Like, depression is not all he is. There's other things that he is, and I want him to learn to cope better with his depression and to share his story in a way also, and let him know that he can also be that figure to someone else.
Yeah. And okay, so if y'all don't know, Masera is in Wichita, Kansas. Brittany is where are you in New York, Brittany?
I'm in the Bronx.
Okay, Brittany's in the Bronx, and then Nora is in Tallahassee, Florida. So everyone's kind of dealing with these experiences in completely different places. Nora, I'm curious, how has living in Florida, Tallahassee, impacted your experience with disability, and kind of like, how do those intersections play into that feeling of otherness?
Oh man, there's so much to unravel in that. So as part of that, my dad was a professor at Florida A&M University, which is an HBCU. I'm very white. My parents are white. I went to a Title I school. I went to 2 Title I schools actually. So I was very aware of these kinds of things. Again, my mom's a speech pathologist. I will say that it's because of me that she became a speech pathologist. But, you know, I was very aware of these things growing up. And yeah, go FAMU, straight. So it's interesting because Tallahassee is a very liberal city. Well, not as much as anymore, but it's more blue than the rest of the state. So it's a really interesting experience, you know, back 30 years ago when I was a kid growing up, and now as a 35-year-old adult professional in the same town. And just with that experience of having my dad be at FAMU, my mom is teaching at Rickards High School, which is one of the Title I high schools here. So for me, it, as like a normal white kid growing up, it was definitely like, oh, other, like if you're diagnosed with something, there's something wrong with you. I remember my sister was diagnosed with a learning disability when we were in elementary school, and I didn't get it. I didn't understand it. I was like, yeah, she's fine though. So why is everybody kind of like, you know, but it was, I think it's very much that like kind of white Southern community, that you have to be perfect, you have to be put together, you have to, and I never resonated with that. I always felt different from, you know, as soon as I can remember. So the othering is something that I'm not really sure I really looked at a whole ton when I was diagnosed. It was just like, okay, check the box, take the medicine, see the therapist. This is just part of it. But in the last 5 to 7 years, I've really definitely evolved in that and dug into with the ADHD, the depression, the anxiety, the endometriosis. Then I was diagnosed with adenomyosis. Oh yeah, celiac. I mean, that's not a disability, but all these things on top of the other. I'm like, I dug in to learn more about these disabilities, about myself, how I work with them, how they create me. And one of the things that I have really come to is that we are all different, and I love who I am, and I'm happy about who I am, even when I'm sad, even when I'm scared. I know everyone else is feeling that way, and kind of like what I said last night, if they aren't, they're probably lying. So, you know, even if they aren't willing to admit it, they're not in that space yet, and I will give them space to discover it.
Yeah, no, I really like what you said about just like how this has kind of been an experience for you for the past 30 or so years, but in the past 5 to 7 years, you really embraced learning more and kind of like understanding how it impacts you and understanding like you said, like how, not just how they are diagnoses that you receive, but how they create you. And I know last night when we
love
got
turning 35, by the way. I know everybody's like 30. Oh my gosh. I'm like 35. Bring it. I love it. All this.
I personally think that like it seems like everyone in their 30s, I'm 20 something, I'm a 20 something, and I'm like everyone in their 30s seems like they got a little bit together. So I'm excited for 30. I will just say that. But I'm really curious because Brittany, I think you already mentioned this, but you were diagnosed about a year ago, and when we talked yesterday, I just remember Nora congratulating you on just like how far and how deep you are into your journey, despite, you know, the diagnosis being a year ago. And in a part, I think about just like Nora, kind of what you said about how things have changed over the last 30 years. Brittany, I'm curious, and I don't want to lead your answer, so I'm just gonna say I'm curious, like what made you like be like, okay, I have this diagnosis and now I'm gonna dive into understanding.
The funny thing is, it didn't turn out like it didn't start that way. It started with me in denial. It started with me not fully accepting my diagnosis, and that took a while for me to accept that I was depressed. And now I'm I'm about a year in, and it's still not, there's still times where I'm like, dang, do I really have to take medication like every day right now? But that is my reality right now. And until I am able to completely veer from that, I have learned to, this is just a temporary situation for right now. And one day I will be able to go about my life without having some type of altering, but at the moment right now, it's needed.
Yeah, yeah. So it was like kind of like a necessity that you had to dive in. It was, yeah. I'm curious, and this question is for anyone. We talked a little about your journeys, and I know that, like, you know, the way that we have viewed disability has gone through this very large shift in the last 30 years. Can you, and maybe we'll start with Miss Sarah. I know that said this question's for everyone, but I just want to make sure I'm getting everyone. Can you think of any ways that you've kind of seen that the ways in which like the world treats the disabled in the past year, in the recent present, I'd say?
Yeah, so with the deaf and hard of hearing community, it's a very, very like big shift, I would say. Whereas it's amazing to see the difference in terms of when, for example, my brother was growing up to when I was growing up. And so for my brother, he was bullied for being deaf and hard of hearing. He like back then, they have a lot of like, you know, you were not allowed to learn sign language, and there's still like some families still practice that this day where they're like, oh, you know what, you are not trying hard enough to hear, so we're gonna take away your access to sign language, because why sign when you can just hear instead, when in reality it doesn't work like that. And
Wow.
so it's kind of like, you know, like assimilation. So it's the same, you have that cultural assimilation, you have that disability like assimilation. And so then they kind of like form the deaf and hard of hearing schools. For me personally, like with my family, my brother, you know, he's like, whereas when he was growing up, it's something he had to very confidently be like, you know, I am deaf and hard of hearing. This is a part of my identity. I deserve to be here. He had to go and create that space. Whereas for me, he had already created that space for me to come in and be more comfortable with my own self. And kind of like what that looks like for me. And also the whole cultural background comes into play with it. You still have that cultural identity that's like, oh, you know, for example, in the Arab community, is something that you don't talk about whatsoever. I have family members in Jordan who are also deaf and hard of hearing. You don't talk about them being deaf. Whereas, you know, even now today, I still have people telling me, you know, like, why are you talking about it? You shouldn't say anything about it. People won't know. It's something that you hide. Whereas, you know, today people are more confident, people are more accepting of their identities, and they're very loudly being, you know, this is me, this is a part of me, this is, and if that's something that you have a problem with, then that's a you thing. It doesn't affect me. Just live your life.
Yeah. I love what you said about your brother, like opening the doors for you now to be able to, you know, walk into them confidently, even if it didn't start that way, to like be able to walk into them confidently. Now it, and also what you kind of said about just the Arab community and how you had to kind of accept it without that acceptance from them makes me think of, Brittany, something you said yesterday about you said that the Black community doesn't really accept disabilities, or we don't really like view. Can you speak a little bit more about that? And just maybe any changes you've seen?
Yeah, sure. So I feel like if you look at the history of Black African Americans, I'm sure there's tons of undiagnosed individuals in there. And because we were othered already, right? Like it's kind of like you can't be othered again in a way, if that makes sense. Like we don't want to other you again because you're already othered. So I think that over time, it has gotten better. I do think that there is work to be done as always, but like I feel like we're in a space now that we're starting to see past generations in our own spaces that are like oh yeah, you know what, you might have been going through some things, but you just didn't know it at the time. And there wasn't a name for it. And like, we didn't have the knowledge that we have now. So I think now it's being more, it's more of a conversation now than it was in the past. And I think that that's a really, really good space, especially for African Americans, where we've often been like, you know, we're seen as like we're not supposed to be hurt or tough. You know, like we have to be tough because
Yeah.
that's that's what's been ingrained in us. So I think now it's definitely opened a space. I think the internet, social media has helped a lot, and people just doing this and getting out there and just realizing that there are people who look like you and they are going through similar things. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that. In that same vein, Nora, you said something yesterday that really stuck with me. You said that this acceptance of like in this creation of inclusivity, this accessibility, this acceptance, it's not just important just for our story and the hour that you were speaking of was the people with disabilities, but our evolution as a society. And in a world where 1 in 4 adults in the US have some type of disability, I think that that's so true. So I have a new question for you. How do you think that, we create a world that's more accepting, and how community and conversation and things like this play a part?
I think part of that, and even hearing you say 1 in 4, it's like, it's got to be more than that, right? Like I truly believe that, just knowing from my personal experience and friends, and I try to gravitate towards many different groups of people. So it's not like I'm just hanging out in the neurodivergent disability community, right? I try to, I love storytelling. That's why I'm a content manager. And I just love to listen to people's story and hear their stories. So I try to be around as many people as I can. But I think one of the things, going back to that number, I think one of the biggest things is to be truthful to ourselves. And if we're truthful to ourselves, we're more truthful to others, whether that's at work, whether that's, family, whether that's our doctors, whether that is friends, and being real with ourselves and truthful with ourselves will help spread that, kind of like karma, if you want to think about it that way, but really, being open and honest. The job that I have now, I got about 1.5 years ago. And I actually talked with my boss ahead of this panel, because I've been curious, but I thought it would be a great thing to bring up. In the interview that I had leading up to that job offer, it was a half-hour interview. I was so nervous. I was burnt out from my previous job. It was the second time I was burnt out in less than 2 years from a job before that. And I was desperate, but I also was just to the point where I was so burnt out, I couldn't mask. I'd gotten to the point where I couldn't mask anymore. And I'm pretty good at masking, at least I used to be. And so I had this job interview, half hour, and turn off the Zoom camera, walk out, because I had to do it at work because we were back in the office, walked out of my office. And as I'm like heading to the bathroom or the kitchen or wherever I was going, I was like, man, that was a really great conversation. Oh shit. Oh my God. I just bombed that. That wasn't supposed to be a conversation. That was supposed to be an interview. I was too much myself. Well, apparently that worked, because the notes from my boss went to the VP, and he's like, yep, I looked at her LinkedIn. She sounds great. Go ahead. I don't need to interview her, offer her a job. And they offered me $5,000 more than what I had asked. So that's a really great motivation, I think, for be yourself, be truthful to yourself, and it will come back. But what's also really wonderful when I talk to my boss, he's a white CIS male. I mean, he's there, just, you know, typical Midwestern white male, not neurodivergent. I asked him, I was like, you know, was there anything about that interview, what I said, you know, since we've been working together that, you know, you can kind of speak to? And he said that one of the things he really appreciated about me was my honesty, my creativity, which was helpful. I really appreciated that. But my honesty and being upfront about, this is the way I think. This is the way that I view the world. And there have been several times where, you know, they've done different things because we work remotely, that like I get overwhelmed. And I've told them, I was like, I gotta step out. It's Zoom. I gotta like put on, you know, the screen, or just like log off for a few minutes. And he's like, I really appreciate that. It helps me know what is and isn't working as team environments, as team building skills. And I'm like, oh, okay. So, I mean, it's helpful to be truthful, but it's also helpful to be around people who want to learn that. So, but the first step is to be yourself, be honest with yourself, be truthful, and you give that space for the others to learn. And I think that's it's important for those who do not identify with having a disability to also take that education themselves. Because I will tell you, I had a lot of imposter syndrome before coming on this, because I got a little burnt out on advocacy as well. My husband has type 1 diabetes, as I mentioned before. I have endometriosis. We did all the advocating, but that's a lot of education.
Yeah.
That's a lot of education, and it takes a toll. It takes a toll. So for those, again, who don't identify with having a disability, just being open to learning and then doing your own digging is huge.
Yeah, no, yeah, like, you know, once you put it out there, now it's no longer your burden to teach everyone, while you're also dealing with your own experiences. It should, like, we should want to support each other in that way. And I really appreciate that you have a boss that sees you in that way and that creates space for you. And I have a question off of that, but I also want to address Gabrielle's note in the chat. So maybe I'll save the question for if we have some time at the end. I too was thinking about that, just how a lot of disabilities are, we don't understand them because we cannot perceive them. They're not visible to us. And it got me to thinking a little bit more about, a little further into that othering comment that we kind of talked about, like all of you here kind of dealing with disabilities that looking at you, people wouldn't see. And I'm curious, in your opinion, how has that kind of, what am I trying to say? How has that affected your journey? Like, are there types of disabilities that you've seen that the world, the industry tends to neglect? Or like, is there something where it's like everyone focuses on this but never speaks about that? And I'll leave that one open.
Well, and I'll say, you know, because this is so this is kind of what tempered the, you know, me and Yad getting closer, was that when I took his DEI in marketing class in the fall. And one of the things that we talked about, I told him, I was like, this was my favorite class. I feel like I want to take it for the rest of the semester. It needs to be another like DEI in marketing too. We like didn't even hit on ADHD and how that is presented in advertising, in marketing, and it was just like that sparked he and I had like a 2-hour phone conversation. We were supposed to talk about some sort of assignment or something, and we were like totally went off on the deep end of like ADHD. And so I think, you know, that's definitely one that is it's pigeonholed into you're a 10-year-old boy, hyperactive, and you can't sit down. There ain't no way. No, like that. I mean, have lots of energy, but no, that wasn't ever me, obviously, in many regards, but in commercials and advertising and in marketing, but in stories in general, I think women with ADHD and different women of color with ADHD is not represented at all. Neurodivergent thinking, autism, that is something I think that needs to be way more inclusive.
Yeah. And Miss Sarah, I'm thinking about you with that comment. Oh, I didn't even know you were deaf. What are your thoughts on that question?
Definitely we need a lot more representation and also different types of representation. Even when you have like we really do have like a lot of lack of representation in terms of like the like people of color within the marketing and advertising industry, and then even less than with like people with disabilities. And even with everything, the main thing for everyone to do is to really learn. And also with Karen's comment in the chat, and it is exhausting. And it's always that little sort of fear, like whenever you, for example, you go into a job interview or you're applying for something, you're like, okay, is me being deaf and hard of hearing going to be a factor in which they tell me, no, you're not going to get this job because of their subconscious bias against people with disabilities, especially being within the creative field as well. Like, for example, I do some video editing, I work with audio. So it's a little ironic. And so I know there's just always this little fear of like, I feel like they're going to reject me because of my disability. And I know that's something that my brother really struggled with. And it has happened to him as well, where they're like, oh, you're deaf. And he's like, yeah, we're hearing aids, you know? And they're like, oh, cool. And
Right.
he's like, definitely not getting this job. And so it's always definitely trying to advocate and trying to get past that fear. And there's always going to be some sort of situation where people's subconscious bias come out in which they're like, yeah, you have a disability, we don't really want that, then that's not a space you want to be in.
Yeah. Going back to what Nora said about just like honoring your own truth and giving, like, laying that out there, and then you kind of decide, giving other people the decision, the chance to decide what they will or will not do with that. Grateful that everyone in this room is wanting to do something with that. I know that we only have about 20 minutes left, and I want to make sure we leave time for Q&A at the end, but I do have a couple more questions that I want to make sure we hit on. So Brittany, sorry that I am going to bypass your answer, but this next question is for you. Because you teach students with autism, I'm curious, what have they taught you about your own journey with disability, and in turn, what do you hope to impart upon them?
I think the biggest thing that I've learned is that disability doesn't look the same for everyone. Even their autism presents itself in many different ways. And there are some students who need more support in my class, and then there are some students who don't need as much support in my class, but yet they're on this vast spectrum of autism, and they all look different. And that's what it's taught me, that like it took me a while to understand that I look like, I don't know how to say it, like I am someone of color who is dealing with a mental disability. That's what it was. And it took a while for me, like I said before, to accept that. So for them, who they've been going through this their entire lives, sometimes they don't understand that their autism presents itself differently to each other. And that's one thing that I want to embrace within my classroom. And then also with them learning how to advocate for themselves, and just don't look at themselves as a disability first, look at themselves as the person first that has a disability.
Yeah, no, I love that. Because Nora, that thing you said about like the things that create me, it's it's like sitting with me, because we all, like you all have been hammering down on throughout this conversation, we are all other to someone. We are all dealing with life in different ways. And so I feel like people with disabilities are really a great, give us a great like eyesight into kind of how we should, for one, how we should support each other, really. I remember when I first began grappling with an understanding of my own ADHD, a friend of mine told me that, like, while in Western culture, we view ADHD as something to be dealt with or a problem, in Eastern culture, they consider you a wide thinker. And while I don't have like the research to prove that, it really changed my whole view of what I initially viewed as a problem. And like I said, in a world where we're all other, I'm curious how you all think that accessibility and a changed understanding of disability can really kind of change and also highlight different kinds of otherness and thinking and being.
I guess I'll go first. I think that changing the understanding of disability can help by just creating the space that there is a space for people with disability. Just acknowledging that there are people who you work with or you live with or you go out to lunch with or whoever, they may have a disability. So I think just providing that space, like having, I don't know, things or whatever it may be, like letting them know that your disability, again, it doesn't really, not that it doesn't matter, but it's not a vital and part of everything that you stand for, rather. So I think just having that space to acknowledge that there are people with disabilities is a big thing that can change how we look at otherness.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, something that I really love about that, Imani, and I think Yad is like on our same wavelength, because I am a wide thinker. I hadn't heard that before, yesterday, today. Like, I love that. And that I'm very strategic, I'm very efficient. And one of my former bosses told me that I was not mainstream enough. And I was like, I don't think that's as bad as you think it is. I really actually appreciate, and I mean, he like Ron Burgundy in real life, which was not good. I promise you, not a good boss to have in real life. So, I took it as a compliment, because I think it's a really great way to be thinking, because I see differently than other people, and you want to have lots of different perspectives, and knowing that there's more. Yeah, I'm not granola enough. Exactly. It's like, thanks, I don't really want to be. But knowing, there might not be, more people like me nearby that I can communicate with or go have dinner with or lunch with, but just knowing that you're out there and that we can connect somehow, it makes me feel better. But also understanding that my ADHD is Nora Clark ADHD. And so what I, experience is going to be different than Imani ADHD. Like, I think that's always also something to really kind of dig into. And then to take that like one step further, just really taking the space to understand we're not alone as people with disabilities, disability community, and that can help bring us together, even though it may be differences of depression, ADHD, hard of hearing, blind, any number of things. Instead of fighting against access for one particular group, uplifting all is something that I think is hugely important as well.
Yeah, I love that. Miss Sarah, how you feel?
I think really what Brittany and Nora said, everything they said was just 1000% trillion% true. And so it's really kind of like just being there to support each other and just hearing each other's conversations and really having an open space for everybody and really to create those spaces where it's accommodating to as many people that you can, you know. And that's either, you know, somebody with a mental or physical disability. For example, if you have any type of video, you really should think about captioning services. Regardless if somebody is deaf and hard of hearing or not, sometimes it's just easier to read than it is to hear. And so yeah, it's a community thing in terms of creating that space. And it really just takes one step for a person for a change to happen.
Yeah, I love that. Those are all like same, Kenny, same. I can't see them without them for some reason. But no, those are really all great answers. And I'm really excited for like the world that we're starting to build here with this conversation that will be accommodating for all different types of people, that will allow us to support each other without questioning or without othering. So I'm just so glad. I have one last question before I want to open it up to Q&A, because I'm selfishly trying to take up all the questions. But as I was writing this discussion guide and I was thinking through what I wanted to talk about earlier, I thought about this Nina Simone quote, and I think a lot of us have probably heard it before, but she famously said that freedom to me means no fear. I know that fear has come up a lot in this conversation, in the way of imposter syndrome, in the way of denial, and I'm sure in a lot of different ways that we haven't talked about here today. And I also read a book recently by a woman who also deals with disability. And in the book, she spoke about the luxury, quote unquote, luxury of not hurting, or the luxury of not being at the mercy of her own body. I'm curious, what does freedom look like to you? Or like, what does a world where, you know, where you're free to experience how you were created with these different disabilities look like?
Especially for me as like a deaf and hard of hearing person, the world is definitely not made to accommodate somebody like me. And so it is, I will say, sometimes a struggle to put on my sound processors every single day to hear when, you know, I spent that comfort in the morning. You know, me and my brother, we just like to have like deaf times. We were like, okay, you know what, this entire day we're gonna go completely deaf. Everybody, instead of us having to accommodate to everybody else around us, they have to accommodate to us. And so it's always like frustrating. I'm like, okay, I have to put on I call them my ears. I have to put on my ears, and you can't speak sign language to communicate with me, or you don't want to take that effort, like to like even just opening notes on your phone and trying to talk to me. It's just like simple, you know. And so freedom to me, in some like with this world, it's really kind of that openness of a space where I can, you know, be comfortable enough to walk outside without my ears on and not have to worry about missing anything
Yeah,
and being excluded. So
yeah, thank you.
You
I'm
want
not
to go, Brittany, or do I need to go?
I'll go really quick. So for me, freedom doesn't even have to do with the world. It's more for me. Freedom for me is being able to freely navigate my life through the depression and anxiety. This is, again, all very new to me still. So if I can freely just move throughout my life and not feel like I have to assimilate or have to kind of hide, I think that that's freedom for me. And one day I'll get there. Today is not that day, but one day.
one day at a time though, right? Yeah. Nora, we'll save you for last.
Yeah, I think I have to go with Brittany on that. You know, quick stories. I remember several years ago when I was working in Jacksonville, I had a really close friend that I had made there, and middle child, ADHD, grew up with, hearing issues, and so I wasn't very close with a lot of people. I had a group of friends, but I was like, oh my gosh, I have a best friend. This is awesome. I'm like so proud of myself opening up. I had a really bad endometriosis flare on her birthday, and I had a huge migraine. My belly was like bloated, like I was 6 months pregnant. I was just in so much pain, and I texted her. I didn't go to work. I took the day off because I was at home under the covers, and I texted her that I wasn't going to be able to make it to her birthday party, and I was so sorry. I know there's just nothing I could do. She didn't talk to me for a month, and I had no clue why. She avoided me. I would text her, and she finally texted me that she was hurt that I didn't go to her birthday party. And I mean, this was when I was like 28, 29. So this is not like, she's an adult woman as well. And that freedom to not have to explain myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, that's the freedom to think the way that I think and not be like, oh, that's weird and quirky. Oh, that's not mainstream. You're not granola. Not like, screw y'all. Like,
Yeah.
I would love that freedom for sure.
Ooh, I love it. I thank you all so much, because what I heard here was just like a freedom to experience what you're currently dealing with without any inhibitions, and to fully like live in it, and to go out into the world without your ears, and people still treat you with respect and with kindness and still support you, and to be able to walk into the world with depression or with endometriosis and still be respected and acknowledged by the people, not even only the people that care about you, because we would hope that they would support us, but like just one, and for one ourselves, but for another, just like wider society. So I want to thank y'all so much. I know that like everyone else probably has other questions, but I just want to thank y'all so much for sharing your stories with me, for being open to be in conversation with me, and for just like giving me so much to think about. And I hope that in the future we can continue this conversation, and we can continue to look at, and hopefully maybe if we talk about it again next year, it's in the world just looks a little bit different, and we can celebrate that a little more. But I will now give up the reins. I know we only have technically 4 minutes left. I have about 10 more minutes, if that's okay with the other panelists. I don't want to co-opt anyone's time, but if there are any questions, please feel free to turn off your mic and ask. And if you guys don't, I have another question. So. Okay, I'm gonna ask my last question then, unless somebody jumps in at any point. And if you interrupt me, I will not feel any type of way. But I actually did put this, I did ask for community input when starting to, like I said, to create the dialogue for this conversation and kind of think of how I want to be guided. And, like I said, I hope we're all leaving the conversation hoping to better support our disabled brothers and sisters, and in turn do better at supporting a lot of us. But when I asked for this community input, I got this question. I'm sure it's something that, even if we didn't just say it, there's something we're all curious about. Do maybe like one from each of you guys, if you can think of one. If not, Imani, stop. Do you have any tips or tricks that someone without a disability can walk away with, so that they would feel more prepared in being able to like approach the conversation that we just had, and be more inclusive and equitable to people that are dealing with disabilities?
I think,
sorry, good.
okay. for me, the biggest thing that I've really learned is sympathy and empathy. Like literally the saying, walk a mile in someone else's shoes. Like not just walk a mile in someone else's shoes, but take it all in from their perspective, what they have to deal with, and then walk that mile. That's completely different than just walking a mile in their shoes. Empathy is hard to do because that means you have to have had like the same experience. Sympathy is not. Opening up your mind to being sympathetic and really imagining, and my brain, I tell stories to myself to help me fall asleep at night. So, but imagining myself in someone else's shoes. Again, my husband has type 1 diabetes. We've done a lot of advocating for that. I've met women with endometriosis and type 1 diabetes. Are you kidding me? Like thinking about that, like what I've had to do in terms of endometriosis, and then having to check my blood sugar as often as like my husband does, dealing with insurance about all the, you know, the different stuff that we deal with, but all like it gives me chills thinking about it. People need to do that. That's what I would ask everyone.
Yeah. Sympathy, definitely.
I agree. Yes, I think sympathy and empathy and just overall kindness is the way to go. But I also would like for people who do not have a disability to not assume that they know what other people are going through. Even if you are someone with a disability, don't assume that your journey and your path is the same. You may have similar things, but it is not equal. It looks different, like we've talked about all, for the last hour. It looks different amongst everyone. So don't assume that you know what they're feeling.
Yeah. Nora Clark ADHD doesn't look like Imani Crawford ADHD, as Nora said. And I'm sure Brittany Weiss depression doesn't look like whomever else is. Just like Masera, you and your brother grew up in the same household, and I'm sure being deaf and hard of hearing for you guys to not look the same at all. So yeah, I really appreciate that. Masera, do you want to close us out?
Sure. I would say some of my tips and tricks would basically, it's really step outside your comfort zone. And so I feel like a lot of times, like with like able-bodied people, it's easy to stay in your comfort zone. You don't have to. It's very it's not fun per se to think outside of that. To be in a situation where, for example, like go to a deaf and hard of hearing event like ASL. Like this, I know like people would love to have you there. And they appreciate it when you're there because you're like, oh, that means, we're important, you care about us, and not being brushed off to the side. It's also rather than you creating a space for them to come, it's you being in their spaces as well.
Yes, no, thank you. That what you all just said to me really made me think about my sister has this quote that she always says, and she's like, in order to create a new world, we have to completely reimagine. We can't imagine through the lens of the world that we already exist in, but we have to reimagine. And all of those tips and tricks were just, I think that they were like a lesson into how we can reimagine. So thanks so much for sharing that with us, and thanks so much for sharing your stories. I feel so full for you all allowing me to be a part of this conversation, to guide it. And I'm so grateful to the rest of the Roses and all of everyone else that's in the garden right now for joining us. Thank you so much for being open and sympathetic or empathetic and just open to hearing and listening and to accepting what we have to say. And so thank you, Kenny, for just always for creating this space for us too.
You're very welcome. And thank you to all the panelists. And I have to give shout out to Masera because the closed captioning, we started using closed captioning when Masera joined our program to accommodate her. So we have to thank her for teaching us how to be better. So we are so very, very lucky to have her in the garden and go from a member of one of our programs to an actual panelist and being active within the community. So I like to thank Masera, Nora, Brittany, obviously the hostess with the mostest, Imani, and everyone for pulling up tonight. We will be back next month with our Arab American month panel. That should be fire again, like it was last year. But I want everyone to just have a good night. And remember, don't be granola. Put it on a t-shirt. Take care.
Don't be granola.
Good night.
Good night, y'all.